On my podcast, we have a recurring bit with my two favorite pieces of audio the president has ever provided.
You are fake news.
Very fake news.
And we use these clips to have some fun when we're discussing a false or misrepresented story. But we also often use these clips against ourselves when we have presented something incorrectly. It's now a tradition on the show, and I'm glad people hold us to it. Both because it's funny, but also because the audience knows we aren't trying to get it wrong, even though we sometimes do. And because we want to get it right, I'm grateful when they set us back on track after we've gone astray. And so in that spirit, in the spirit of pushing those you admire to get it right when you believe they've missed the mark, I'm making this video. You may have seen some stories circulating about a particular moment during the president's address to a joint session of Congress on Tuesday night. During that speech, President Trump honored Karen Owens, the widow of slain Navy SEAL Ryan Owens, killed in action during an anti-terror raid in Yemen on January 29th. Some of these stories claim that Democrats refused to stand and clap to honor Karen, choosing instead to remain seated and ignore the moment. Three minds I greatly respect, Ben Shapiro, Steven Crowder, and Milo Yiannopoulos, all published variations of this claim to their respective websites after the speech. If you're like me, that claim sounds suspect. Now, I'm no longer a fan of the Democratic Party or its leadership, but would they really make a point to disrespect a military widow? Are they really that low? Let's examine what happened, how these three reported it, and see how much of the truth we can uncover. During Karen Owens' recognition, there were 3 applause breaks, once after introducing her, once after describing the mission on which Ryan Owens died, and once to close after President Trump promised Ryan will never be forgotten. During each applause break, nearly everyone in the chamber rises and claps, the Democratic side included, though for different durations. Now let's look at the reporting, specifically the headlines. Shapiro writes, "Awful. Top Democrats refuse to stand, clap for Navy SEAL widow honored by Trump." Crowder's website says, "Appalling. Trump honors Navy SEAL widow. Democrats disrespect her." Milo's website says, "Terrible. Stone-faced Democrats refuse to stand for Navy SEAL widow honored by Trump." It's easy to demonstrate the overwhelming majority of those in attendance stood and clapped during each applause break during this segment of the speech. So saying Democrats refused to stand and clap and honor this woman is a bit overstated, but maybe these are just attention-grabbing headlines. Maybe the content of the reporting is actually more specific. Let's take a look. Shapiro's original report identifies 4 individuals, Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Keith Ellison by the headline photo, as well as Nancy Pelosi and Bernie Sanders saying they, quote, initially stood for the widow, but then they sat. Shapiro writes, "This duo and others apparently sat there and didn't cheer as the incredible moment progressed." Crowder's story is less specific, simply alleging, quote, "some Democrats apparently sat," rather than applaud, with the same picture of Keith Ellison and Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Milo's story is similar, calling out the same 4, Pelosi, Sanders, Ellison, and Wasserman Schultz, but with just a picture of the chamber generally that appears to show the Republican half cheering and the Democratic half sitting. So what really happened? Let's go to the tape. First, let's take the claim against Nancy Pelosi and Bernie Sanders, since those are the 2 Shapiro calls out within the text of his article. Both of them can be seen standing and clapping during almost all of the applause breaks. I haven't seen a camera angle that includes Pelosi on the first applause break, but here she is during the second applause break, still standing and clapping after applause has been ongoing for more than 30 seconds. Here she is rising and clapping again during the third applause break. As for Bernie, here he is rising and clapping during the first applause break, here he is rising and clapping during the second applause break, and here he is rising and clapping during the third applause break. I don't see any reason to be mad at Nancy Pelosi or Bernie Sanders here. With Keith Ellison and Debbie Wasserman Schultz, it's a little less clear, but there are still some problems with the reporting. First, the screenshot shown of them in Shapiro and Crowder's stories is actually from 45 minutes earlier, a completely different section of the speech. In fact, when Trump introduced Karen Owens, both Ellison and Wasserman Schultz can be seen standing and applauding for at least 16 seconds. To Shapiro's claim that they sat during the latter sections of the applause, it's unclear. There is a point in the second applause break where Ellison and Wasserman Schultz can be seen sitting, But it's about 45 seconds after applause was established and just before everyone else starts sitting down. The most damning visual evidence against Ellison and Wasserman-Schultz can be seen during the third applause break, at the start of which they are visible on camera seated, and by the look of it, not clapping. It should be noted the third applause break was the shortest. So we've got one applause break in which these two clearly stand up and cheer, one applause break in which it's unclear, and one applause break in which they do not. Could we say they weren't sufficient in their respect? Perhaps. Can we say they refused to stand and clap, purposefully disrespecting the widow? Refused to stand and clap, I guess. Except for that part where they stood and clapped. And there are more problems with the screenshots provided as evidence in these stories. We noted how the photo of Ellison and Wasserman-Schultz seen to head Shapiro's story and embedded in Crowder's story is not from this portion of the speech, but it's presented juxtaposed with the widow to give the impression these photos depict simultaneous events. Shapiro conceded that presentation is misleading, amending his story to display a different photo, the same one in the Milo story that shows the Republican half of the chamber cheering and the Democratic half seated. Shapiro notes that this is a more fair photo because it is at a contemporaneous time with the 2-minute standing ovation for Mrs. Owens. That's a generous characterization, however, because that screenshot actually comes at the very end of the standing ovation, the latest possible moment before Karen Owens herself takes a seat and Donald Trump resumes speaking. A more honest screenshot would be one during the heart of the ovation, during which pretty much everyone is standing and clapping, the Democratic side of the aisle included. In fixing the screenshot issue, Shapiro still chooses one that suits his purposes, rather than choosing one that accurately represents the moment. Are these reports 100% false? Maybe not 100. There is a nugget of truth in that, on average, Democrats probably did stand and clap for less time than did Republicans. But refused to stand and clap? The only way you reach that conclusion is if you ignore the part where everyone you're calling out did in fact stand and clap. The honest debate here is whether certain members of the party clapped long enough or enthusiastically enough for your liking. The debate is not whether they refused to clap out of deliberate disrespect for the widow. This is the same treatment CNN, the New York Times, and other mainstream media outlets often give to Trump. They take something with a tiny nugget of truth and they exaggerate it beyond recognition because it suits their political purposes. And that's exactly what all of these pieces read like. Political smears. Awful, terrible, appalling, each in all caps. I criticize these pieces out of respect. I have way more respect for each of these three guys than for any of the Democratic leaders mentioned. Few have inspired me to think as critically as these three have. And because of that, I know that each of them is fully capable of beating Nancy and Bernie and Keith and Debbie in a battle of ideas fairly, with superior reasoning that's honest with the facts at issue. So, my audience makes me do this when I get things wrong. As friend of the show, That Guy T says, rules are rules. And so I bestow this honor upon you three.
You are fake news.
Very fake news.
And I thank each of you for the overwhelming bulk of work you have contributed in shaping my worldview. You've kept me honest. I'm only trying to do the same for you. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below and especially over on Twitter. That is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to come hang out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Okay, bye.